Thanks everybody for joining us. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Trevor Park. I'm the head of marketing at Betterbot, and with me we have Paul Edgeman, the VP of Marketing and Technology at Thrive Communities. We have Stephanie Soderberg.
Nailed it.
Senior Director, Growth Marketing at Apartment List, and Mike Wolber, Chief Revenue Officer at Rent Dynamics. So today we're chatting about marketing automation, and what I think is funny enough is I think this is the buzzword for 2021 conferences. If you look at the agenda this year, I think there are 3 or 4 sessions that are talking about marketing automation in a lot of different ways. The angle that we're taking is how is marketing automation going to improve your leasing journey? So what tools can we look at? We're going to talk to Stephanie and what tools Apartment List is using, and how she can think that it can be leveraged within the property management side. We'll talk with Mark and Paul as well to get their takes on those. And so I wanted to just kind of baseline everybody and kind of get everybody familiar with marketing automation and what it is as a tool. And so marketing automation is the use of technology to reduce the workload for leasing agents, marketers, and even help on the prospect side. And hi, Hannah, we let you jump in. So if anybody wants to jump in, we have five more spots where anybody can hop in, start adding their input. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up is that in 2019, global marketing automation market was valued at just north of $6 billion. And in a year and a half alone, it's jumped $3 billion to $9 billion. So it's a huge growing industry, and it's definitely something that's picking up a lot of steam. But yeah, I wanted to kick off the first question to Stephanie, if you're up for it.
Yeah,
Apartment List is an interesting placement as they are both B2C, B2B, and then B2B2C company. And with all of those different added layers, marketing automation must be essential for your strategies. How do you continue to drive personalized content to your various targets while also being aware of it?
Yeah, so pretty much you nailed it. Apartment List is a marketplace, right? And so we have to balance the needs of the renters with the needs of our communities. I'm really fortunate in the fact that I've gotten to sit on both sides of the marketplace. So I used to run all of our account management and sales operations, have moved over to the growth marketing side, which is much more about the renter and demand side of the business. So we had to figure out how to balance these things. And honestly, it really all comes down to making sure that we are getting the right renters into Apartment List and doing the right targeting to get the most intentful people in order to make sure that then when they go through our entire process and experience the Apartment List journey, that they're going to find the right home. And so when I think about tailoring content, I think a little bit less around hey, how do we make it specific to that renter, and how do we actually make sure we get the right renters in? And so, if you think about the marketing channels that many people here probably use, like Google, Facebook, getting people in, the best thing that you can do is understand the signals that you are feeding back to them and actually leveraging those channels in a way to make sure that they're targeting the best people. So when I think about marketing automation, I'm how do I leverage the machine learning of something like Google and Facebook to actually automate the way that we market to renters even better? And so the best, I was thinking about this from a multifamily perspective. And if you think about any property management company, maybe you're running a campaign and you're doing something like cost per click, you're generating a lot of clicks. Well, you can actually leverage automation to make this even better, because if you go to your site and someone actually says book a tour or call a property, that's a much better signal to, hey, of intent, this person is way more likely to actually rent at our property. And you can leverage that and send it back to your Google or your Facebook or whatever it might be. And you can start to use that to target better and better renters. And so, for us, when you think about marketing automation, it starts at the very, very top of the funnel. And we use a very similar thing. How are we leveraging these signals to get the right people in? And then we have a whole slew of other things that actually fall on my team, which is once you have them in, how do you engage them? What marketing tools are you using, from your email ESP to your outreach and all of that. But really the reality is the most critical thing we can do is getting people at the top of the funnel that are the most intentful and the most likely to lease.
I totally agree. That's one of the things that I've been diving deeper and deeper into the more I'm diving into this marketing automation side of things, and seeing where those levels of intent can differ based off of their engagement at certain things. You can build these really robust drip campaigns that, based off of like their interest in, like if they click on the amenities part of the email you send them, you can then dive a little bit deeper and then send them one more piece of content that is specific around amenities, and hopefully drive that conversion even quicker than you would by just sending more generic content about it. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Yep, 100%. We even see things like, hey, if someone's going through photos or spending a certain amount of time looking at a floor plan, like what level of intent does that indicate versus someone that's just going through and looking at a bunch of stuff really quickly. And I think that's something that honestly, any property manager, any company could leverage to understand the intent that they're driving and the intent of their user.
100%. That's really cool. I like that. It kind of is reminiscent of how like the TikTok algorithm is now kind of becoming this more thing of like, if you watch a video for a certain amount of time on TikTok, your content's going to be geared more towards video of those similar categories. So that's really interesting, of being able to do the same thing on websites where you can see how long they're looking at photos and how long they're looking at a virtual tour to drive that content further.
You brought up a really good point with TikTok, especially because, so think about TikTok, they're huge. They know more about their users than any individual user or company is going to know about them, right? It's the same thing with Google or Facebook or any of these massive marketing channels. They have ML. I mean, I remember going to a Google conference and they brought up this point, which was, we can literally take one of your users that leased, and if you send back the right signals to us, we'll see that also people that like Avengers and like watch housing videos also fit that. You would never in a million years come up with that on your own, right? Like,
yeah,
we are not sophisticated enough, but Google and Facebook and these massive companies have that data. So the more you can share back with them, the better your marketing is going to get.
Yeah, and I think that's true with any parts of the industry. I think that's why, like for like Betterbot, we partner with so many different people in the space, is because we can cross share that data, and really begin to start to understand that leasing journey to kind of a whole other level. And with apartment lists too, like the stuff that we're seeing with our partnership there is that there are so many touch points that you have access to and you have knowledge of, like being able to see how this one person looked at a property 15 miles away from their current location, but then they also looked at stuff in like their greater circle. So you can start to see what potential migration patterns they might have. And so you can start to kind of plan for that. And it's really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, shifting to Paul. What would you say? So as on the property management side, you're with Thrive Communities. What would you say is one of the largest obstacles you find with marketing automation? And how's your team today adopting those systems to help the leasing team's day-to-day operation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, just to frame it, so, we're mostly in the Puget Sound area with about 100 properties, 11 or so lease ups, just to frame like our experience with this. And I think it's worth mentioning that, COVID has made a huge impact to this. And a lot of our marketing projects have been greatly accelerated over the last, 14 months to really account for, the changes in the marketplace. But it's really been a pretty crazy, just overall shift in our experiences. Our intent to rent conversation, kind of like that Stephanie was talking about, has been, we're trying to dive into it. We're looking at the Google Analytics, and it's just been like the hardest thing to determine what people are looking for, because they're vetting themselves better than ever before online, right? They're spending more time. So we're putting products in place to make sure that they can move themselves down the funnel quicker. And kind of like gather their own momentum to get closer to a rental. So I mean, that's the first layer of it. And the challenges that I don't even want to get into like the team efficiency side of automation yet. We can talk about that later, like how we're helping the leasing teams, be more effective. But yeah, I mean, they're getting themselves down the funnel. They're creating all kinds of new data for our teams to kind of vet and manage. But I'd say by far the biggest challenge is taking the CRM platforms and the leasing platforms we have in place and bolting on services and products that help us and help the teams really kind of triage the flood of leads that comes in seasonally and kind of throughout different COVID lockdown phases. And just making sure that for us, like we want to put something in place that integrates well and creates a streamlined process and doesn't completely ruin any historical data we have in the pipeline. So like our thing is like, we like benchmarks almost don't really make any sense anymore anyway with COVID, because it's like, what do you compare it to, right? What do you compare last March to? There's like nothing.
Yeah, so, we don't have data from the polio years, so.
Yeah, but I mean, we'd like to still be able to retain, like, you know, for us, like it's mostly already CRM. Like we want to be able to retain like at least the touch points that flows in the life cycle, so we can look at the kind of holistic approach to it. And I think our challenge is finding those products and services that then play nice, I guess, to sum it up, with everything else, and make sure that we're not like ripping away the foundation. We're just adding on tools that then create efficiency and create a better experience, and then ultimately help with conversion rates and just, you know, make them want to go to a Thrive property instead of a property next door.
Yeah. So I'm gonna. You mentioned modules and you also mentioned integration. I kind of want to jump into that piece a little bit more, where that I think the integration piece is something that is, with more technologies being constantly thrown at property management companies, what are you doing to vet these vendors to kind of see what integrations work? How are you evaluating how a new vendor fits within your current system? And if that vendor doesn't fit in the current system, what is that like tipping point of like, okay, they don't fit, but we're still going to go with them. Like we're still going to dive into that kind of component, because I think that's also where it's really interesting of like, how much do you go and risk it throwing off your process, but then it has the potential to integrate later on. What are you doing to kind of evaluate those integrations?
Yeah, I think it's a factor of how, I guess, intense the upside is for those platforms. We've definitely taken, as you know, I mean, Trevor, we've talked about this stuff a lot. Thrive's taken some significant kind of leaps of faith with different platforms. I'm not saying Betterbot, don't worry. That was not like a leap of faith by any means. But we've definitely, like, Trevor's helped us with some stuff, and we've had a lot of conversations about things we've implemented. But I mean, yeah, it would have to be something that really changed the day-to-day life of our teams and our leasing agents, and really help them, like, you know, maybe added the ability to interact with people after hours, because we're seeing on our CRM reporting that we're getting like 45% of our leads coming in after 6:30 at night, which is definitely like a real statistic in certain months. So I mean, like something like that, you're like, okay, well, great. The team's gonna have to log into a different platform. They're gonna have to manually input guest cards, but we're going to get 40% potentially additional opportunities at this property that's in lease up, that needs to fill 46 units and has 4 lease ups down the road and can't even tour in person because of a COVID lockdown. So we're like, okay, we'll take that risk, right?
Yeah.
We'll definitely give that a try. So I think, yeah, it's just a factor of, you know, how many pros and cons are in each conversation. I guess we haven't totally signed a metric yet, but definitely that's kind of the conversation we'd have to make those decisions.
That's awesome. No, and I think that's really cool, and it's one of the things that I really value about what you guys are doing as an industry leader is your willingness to kind of take that leap of faith and jump into those new vendor capacities. I mean, like, you guys were one of the first ones to add latch to your homes for like the smart home touring, which I thought was just a really awesome way for them to not only break into that market, but then also being able to like see it firsthand and see how that leasing process worked. It was really flawless.
Well, Trevor, credit more, I'd say a lot of cases to our clients. There are a lot of them in the Seattle area are just so focused on like innovation and differentiation that a lot of times they're like, we are doing this, and Thrive's like, you know what? I've been looking for an excuse to do this, and I will do that. Definitely. Let's do it. That's
fantastic.
So,
yeah.
So I can apologize to the property operations team on this in case they're watching, and say sorry for doing that.
Perfect. Okay, Mike, I'm going to field you one. Your focus is as a CRO is on the customer experience as they navigate through your go-to-market strategy. How are you using technology to maximize your team and campaign effectiveness? And then what metrics are you prioritizing to evaluate that performance?
And are you curious about this from the perspective of us, from our business, or how we're doing this with our customers for them to guide their prospects and current residents through their respective experience? Because those are going to be two really different paths for me.
Totally. And I think that let's go with the latter for the market. I definitely do want to, if we have time, to learn more about what you guys are doing from a business perspective as well, because I feel like we do have some people that are also interested in on it from a vendor side.
Sure.
But let's focus on good question, leasing side.
Yeah, so I joined Rent Dynamics about 4 months ago, and it's been really fun and eye-opening because I spent the last 6 years building and growing marketing. And so I have a really interesting perspective now that I'm sitting in this land of CRM where I can see up into the marketing realm, but also down into the operations realm. And I think the first thing that we're realizing as we work with current but also future customers is that measuring is the first thing you should be doing, and see what's working. And what I'm experiencing, and I think what our customers are experiencing, is that you can leverage technology to really understand if you've got a lead or a marketing problem, or do you have a leasing problem, or let's say a leasing opportunity. Oftentimes what we're seeing is that you're getting really good quality leads from the different marketing efforts, websites, SEO, internet listing services, all the different places. And then you look in the actual technology and you're not taking good care of your leads. You're not responding fast enough. You're giving up after the first touch. And it's really shining a spotlight on the opportunity to leverage automation in an abundance of ways that also don't need to be overwhelming. And so I'll walk through a couple of those, and I'm open to ideas, inputs from anyone, because I think it's really, really fun. It's a great time to be in multifamily. The first is that if you're not using different technology today, that's okay. Whether that's virtual leasing, self-guided touring, a couple examples kind of more upstream. And my encouragement there would be try them out and then see. What's the impact that has on the velocity that a prospective resident shows up for a tour and hopefully turns into a move-in? And measuring that velocity by marketing channel gives you a lot of opportunity to really understand where should you apply or where should you pull back on marketing spend and different things you can do from a technology and spend standpoint. What we really see a lot of value in with our customers, Trevor, is once you get someone to show up for that tour, like one of the most important, experiences in that leasing cycle is that they don't always call the next day to fill out the application. We wish they would, but they don't. And what we see is an opportunity to really automate that follow-up experience to make sure that you don't give up after a single touch. And there's a lot of marketing automation out there that a lot of different technologies and companies are creating to really make sure that, like, here's an example. Someone comes in for a tour and they wanted a 2-bedroom and you don't have any available. So it's pretty common to lose track of that really, really rich, warm lead. So why not have a program in place, whether it's automated or just business process, to say, as soon as that 2-bedroom comes available, give them a call. And what a great opportunity to then really go back and grab someone without having to go spend more on the marketing front to nurture them back into the funnel. And those are the kinds of things that I think we're seeing a lot of tactical but really impactful results and also success with currently.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think from a CRM tool, I think we've made such great leaps in the last 4 years. Like, I remember when I first started at Graystar, and we had a property that was just using an Excel sheet for their lead tracking. And it was the date they reached out, either by phone or by email, and then it was added with all of their details in this sheet. And it was before they didn't want to make the jump into Yardi. They didn't want to make the jump into Entrada or anything like that just yet. But they were using this, and it was thousands, like tens of thousands deep with leads, because it was like a 15-year-old property, and that's how they tracked it. But they weren't doing anything with those leads after that initial touch point. Like you said it perfectly, of like, there are so many things that you could do after the fact. Like, you have that first touch point, and if they don't reach out, like, keep reaching out. Like, one of the things that I'm doing with my marketing campaigns is basically, like, I want one of two goals. They either opt in and they, like, continue to subscribe to our marketing channels, they schedule a demo, or they unsubscribe. So 3 things. So like they unsubscribe, and like the more people that I can get to unsubscribe, those are like the people that we know aren't fully interested, and so we don't have to waste our time with those. But you don't know that after one touch point. They might miss the email, it might go to a spam folder, or it might like get lost in their to-do list and they just never respond. And like, so there's so much opportunity there for the follow-up to actually convert more than the actual initial touch point. So that's a really good point. But yeah, I wanted to, Hannah, we see you on the call here too. I want to open it up to you. What are you guys doing at G5? What are you guys doing for marketing automation there?
Well, first off, we're a partner with your company, Betterbot. So yay!
Yes.
For that. So our incentives are definitely aligned there. So we agree with everything that has been discussed as far as being there for your prospects when you're closed. A lot of that interaction is happening after hours. So we want to offer that to our clients when we're building their websites to make sure that they have coverage all the time. We also are looking at just the multi-touch attribution, like digging in. I think all the companies are, right? Figuring out that runner journey and how can we improve it? How can we study it? How can we figure out where they're making decisions and where we need to be in front of them? And so a lot of that, we've got some tools. One of them is call scoring. So we've built some machine learning technology that will listen to the calls and then let us know if that is an actual renter. So we're kind of gauging the intent to rent and providing that back to our clients so that they can see not only from the digital advertising and the SEO traffic to their website, but also other marketing sources that they may be using. So really getting down and helping them spend their dollars better and just watching that customer journey and figuring out where we can optimize.
That's a really good point. I think, yeah, finding those specific points of optimization are really key, because you can start to look at the funnel and see where those bottlenecks are and really start to evaluate like what are the things that are holding those pieces up. And like, so my time at Remarkably, that was like our big focus, is that being able to look at that entire funnel. And when you see like top of funnel, like you have a lot of leads coming to the website, but then nothing being scheduled as a tour or nothing being scheduled or like even reached out as a prospect, the first thing that you can do is you can look at your contact forms, you can look at your phone number, you can look at your lead tracking, you can kind of evaluate all of these different data points right off the gate to see what's holding you up. And more often than not, you'll find that little thread that you can start pulling on, and it'll start unleashing the floodgates. So really, really good point there. I also want to open it up. Everybody on the panel, if you have questions for other people on the panel, feel free. We can throw those out there. We have probably about 15 more minutes or so. And we can also open it up to other people in the chat as well. Robert, I see you're jumping in. We would love to have you jump in as well. You're welcome to join. So anybody, like Stephanie, do you have a question for Mike? Mike, do you have a question for Paul?
I've got one for Paul. And
there we go. Hit it.
You know, one of the things that's interesting to me is like this obsession with measuring. And like I see it in my business, because we want to see what's working, what's not. Are my salespeople good? Are they not? It's the same thing when it comes to marketing spend. And Paul, you're leading a really cool, organization and portfolio at Thrive. And I'm just curious, like, as you're embarking on these different things, whether it's a new technology, a new business process, or a hypothesis, you don't know if it's going to work or not. Google's making it a little bit more difficult for us to track things. They've announced some pretty big shifts as it relates to cookies over the last 60, 90 days. Attribution still isn't perfect in our industry. We're trying, but it's still really, really hard. I see a lot of property website traffic, but what happened before the property website, it's a real thing. And I'm just curious, Paul, as you're embarking on automating and propping up people so they can be more effective, how are you validating if something works or if it doesn't from a marketing standpoint? Because I think as simple as that sounds, I know it's a loaded question.
Yeah, it's a super loaded question. I feel like if I could answer that, yeah, we could all kind of go in together and just go to the next level here. But I think for now, we're kind of using the best possible tools at hand. So we use a combination of like kind of Thrive designed dashboards and metrics, like around, leasing velocity paired with, overall kind of leads per unit, spend per unit, all of that. But the problem is we can run all of, like, look at a property like for us in Bellevue, for example, Washington and like run it through every single analytic possible, over the last 12 months, and then compare it to one, say in Shoreline, which is like 30 miles north, completely different data set, completely different success metrics. And they could both be successful lease ups for the last 12 months. And then you layer a COVID situation on top, and it's like, sometimes we feel a little bit helpless in terms of like overall gauges of success. Just ultimately is going to come down to, is the property leading the market in rents? Is the property retaining occupancy? It's been a pretty low bar for that, but I think we've been really lucky to still maintain those metrics in this area. So yeah, I would say going full circle, like we've gone back to kind of multifamily basics to attribute success. And then I think we've taken a lot of pride in the last 14 months over our closing ratios in a lot of different areas. Just really looking at that as kind of a thing that you can normalize across different demographics and data sets. And I think we've really leaned in on that a lot and taken a lot of the financial expenditure and like gross lead generation off the table and just looked at how the conversion ratios are coming all the way from first touch all the way through lease execution and renewal.
Have you been able to use any of those closing ratio indicators on site to then make decisions from a marketing standpoint, seeing trends with certain, marketing efforts having a direct impact on closing ratio, or is there still a people dependence there? Because I know the leasing agent is a big part of that process.
Yeah, there's definitely a people dependence. For example, when we rolled out like automation that helped service leads after hours, or that was like an immediate response type chat automation, it was kind of an efficiency play, I guess. We have seen kind of trivial improvements in leasing conversion ratios, at least for like shows, because we'll take the like tour to lease or tour to application off the table for that, right? We'll just look at essentially first contact to show, right? So we've seen improvement. It's like we take it with kind of a cautious grain of salt and with optimism, but I think we just need more time kind of coming out of 2020 to hopefully keep building benchmarks again and start to understand, because between the business changes and the COVID changes, it's almost like dizzying. So I won't talk your ear off about that, but I definitely am optimistic that we're getting closer to having a better like full story.
That's really cool. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
You're muted.
He's talking to himself. It's fine. I was just swearing up a storm. My bad. Robert actually had a really good question as well. He said, love finding key data points such as time it takes for someone to show up for a tour. What are some of the other ones that you see in the buyer's journey? And I want to throw that one to Stephanie because she has you have full picture of this from end to end, very similar to Paul.
Data.
I was just going to say that. I mean, that's one of the really great things about Apartment List, because we follow all the way through to the lease. Like that's our goal. Aligned incentives. We want to get someone to lease through our site and find the right place. And I think, Mike, you talked about this. The idea of getting someone to return again and having that consistent outreach to them is beyond critical. So we find, along with user acquisition, I also run like our email and our retention and our re-engagement. And it's actually in the coming quarters, one of our biggest focus points, because we have found that if someone returns to the site after their first day and re-engages, they are way more likely to lease. Their registration, someone has to go through, they have to register their registration to lease rate, which is essentially our ability to match renters to a lease. It almost doubles when you get someone to return, right? So it's really critical. And this is where I think marketing automation comes into play and is super important, is this idea of like, how do you streamline that process and how do you actually have the right communications to the right people at the right time? So understanding where they are on their journey. Are they still in the search and discovery phase? And so should you be highlighting changes at the properties that they're interested in to be like, hey, a new unit's available or a price increase has happened or a price drop has happened, right? And people who are in that search phase love that, right? They're really intentful. They want to see all the things that are happening because they're gathering all the information. But then you have the people who have started to tour and started to actually narrow their search, and then speaking to them at that point in the user journey is a totally different conversation. And so it's actually, literally this is one of our biggest things, like how do we identify where someone is? How do we serve them the right communications at the right time to actually help them get to lease? But I think it all gets back to this idea that like one touch point is oftentimes not enough. If you have consistent touch points with someone, they're much more likely to engage. And sometimes it's simple things that you can use marketing automation to answer their questions. You don't have to have a person right at the beginning. You just need to get in front of them. And you never want to overwhelm someone, but a lot of these tools have the ability to see, like, has this person engaged with, whether it's an email or a push notification or whatever it might be. And if they engaged, continue them down that path. And so, yeah, I just, hearing what Mike was saying about the idea of building out processes to actually reach people after hours. Paul, you touched upon that as well. Like, it's so critical because you want to have a consistent relationship with people.
That's a really good point. So I see with Nathan Wright, you have a question too, and I want to piggyback on yours, Stephanie. Are you seeing specific cost per lead metrics or cost per lease metrics that, not to put you on the spot, if you don't have those off top of hand, totally not a problem. But like, do you have any of those benchmarks that you're seeing that are kind of like industry blankets? I know it's going to vary by metro area or suburban or more of the urban markets. Like those places will definitely vary. But are you seeing some national averages out there that we might be able to share with the audience?
From our perspective?
Yeah.
So it's actually really interesting. Cost per lead, and I would have to think about this because we have a national, for us, getting someone in is what we're paying for. Mm-hmm. And then when you look at cost per lease, I mean, that's part of our whole thing, right? Like that's our entire business model. So what that lease is going to cost.
That's an easy one with you guys.
Yeah.
So
I know it's totally.
Well, and the leads are probably cheap because you get so many. I mean, you might have to put in marketing automation just to get all the apartment list leads dialed in, right? I mean, in a good way, usually.
Yeah. Right. And Paul, I think you're touching upon something that, we also think a lot about, which is how do we make sure that those leads are the best leads we can be sending and continuing to get better and better and better there. But for us, it's really dials down to cost per lease. And that's something that, there's no surprises there.
Daniel, you popped in. Did you have a question that you wanted to share as well? I think we got you muted. Yes, no?
We're muted, all right.
Okay, no worries.
Let me go with thumbs up.
Awesome. Hannah, do you have any questions for the panel?
Questions? No, I'd like to elaborate a little on what Stephanie was saying, in that I know Apartment List has such a unique, I know personally, such a unique perspective as far as, used to be on that team. Anyway, lead to lease. And it was really nice to be somewhere where you're seeing that top of funnel action. You miss a little bit about what happens outside of Apartment List, right? So you've got that whole thing, but you can see it through to the close. And I think G5 has an interesting perspective in that we're really digging into the early interactions. And through our digital advertising, we can see some of those really early touch points. Also trying to partner with other ILSs, making sure that we can help track and share information for our clients, and then all the way to the property website. And so once they get there, they're kind of ready, right?
Yeah.
Help our clients re-engage, help them sign that lease. And so it does vary. I would love to just spit out a national metric and be like the hero that could name it off for everybody. But, it does vary. We like to see digital advertising cost per lead conversion somewhere in the 20. We've got clients that are lower than that, $80. That's really where we try to stay, and that's a qualified lead they're able to follow up on. But I think when we kind of get our heads together as vendor partners and help share some data, that's where we're really going to jump ahead as an industry, is kind of getting that. And we're all looking at it, and we're all looking at it in a little different way from what we can see.
And I feel like I can jump into her too. Stephanie, I didn't want you to think it was like a shots fired situation as far as like
you're good.
So we use Apartment List across our whole portfolio, and I need to say that it's literally one of the best lease sources for Thrive in the Seattle market, especially the core market. So I didn't want to say by any means that it's a mess, but it is, definitely it's an interesting case study because we do get more apartment list leads proportionally. So our cost per lead is a lot lower when you look at apartment list versus kind of a lockdown cost per lease. And then you look at like a CoStar Zillow situation and PPC advertising, like Hannah was talking about. It is really interesting just to kind of look at the correlations and like how the journey looks from those different buckets. And unfortunately for us, like, I feel like there's kind of a lack of CRM and analytics tools that really help dive into the source specific reporting, which is really what you need to make a decision, right? I mean, and this is going to get into like a rant situation, so I won't go too far, but I mean, really like call to action, like finding specific metrics, like based on each individual source and how well it's converting is so important because apartment list is a totally completely different conversation from G5 advertising, from whatever else you're doing. I think Mike probably has some good insight into this because I know they're doing some cool stuff, but definitely something worth considering is like you're looking at overall conversion ratios and reports, and it just doesn't tell you enough to make any decisions from my perspective. So then you end up making custom pivot tables and figuring out, the best you can over time and all that. So anyway, I guess kick that. Mike, did you have anything to add there? You guys do anything super fun?
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. It's a huge gap. I mean, right now, like, I like the fact that you can log into a CRM and you can see the last source, and it gives you some insight because you can see property website or apartment list or pay-per-click, or you name the last source. Then you can do some, analysis to see what was the velocity from the time that person submitted their information, phone call or a form or a chatbot inquiry, and how long did it take them to become, a confirmed tour, and what was their velocity from tour to move in. But the thing is that doesn't tell the marketer enough to understand, well, how did they get to the website, or how did they get to apartment list, or whatever that might be. So what we're realizing is that it's still very subjective and time intensive to partner with customers and their other vendors to make sure that we're making sense of that data. Because holistically, to answer the question, what marketing investment has the biggest impact on leasing is still somewhat difficult for anyone to empirically prove. And so I think we're in the early days of getting this right. We've done a couple things with Google Analytics to get closer to that, but honestly, that's where we spend a lot of our time is partnering with their other partners, looking at the data and contextually trying to write the correct stories.
That's a great
I
call out.
think we're all on a mission to end your pivot table nightmares. That's
Yes.
for sure.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
I don't want you to have to do that. So yes.
Yeah, I had a little PTSD just then of like, oh, pivot tables.
The best thing we've seen work is really trying to incubate and do like an A/B test. So if you want to try something new, try it super small, like 1 or 2, 3 or 4 or 5 assets, so that you can at least do some, even if it's qualitative. Because otherwise, when we see people, the last 20 years of digital transformations happened in the last 12 months with this pandemic.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I think we've applied so much that now it's like trying to answer the questions, what's working, what's not.
That's a really good point. That's one of the things that we jumped on pretty early in the pandemic, is that we started seeing websites basically just turning into like a Vegas skyline, where it has 3 different forms of nudge marketing. It has 2 different forms of chat. Like there's the guided conversation form. Then there's also the live chat happening. Then there's just your regular banner ads that pop up. And so it starts to get really overwhelming because you want to have all of these
cringing
aspects
from the right now. I can't handle it.
Yeah. And you want to have all of these touch points, and you want to have all of these potential conversion tools, but it's hard to figure out which ones are actually going to work without that A/B testing. Like, okay, I'm going to have 10% devoted to just nudge marketing. I'm going to have 10% devoted to just banner ads. I'm going to have 10% devoted to live chat, 10% devoted to guided conversation chat. Like being able to see how those metrics are actually performing with a single property is really where we're able to kind of take marketing automation to the next level and really kind of start to evaluate that data set, because it's going to be different. It's not going to be the same in San Francisco as it is in Scottsdale, Arizona, or Miami, Florida. Like there's going to be different aspects of it. Even when it comes down to being able to adopt different languages within your your chats or your marketing messaging, of like being able to have different types of slang thrown in there, of like y'alls and the different Southern draws, and like having those kind of components will make you more relatable. And I think that's just something that we're seeing more and more adoption of, but I'm still not seeing like a lot of A/B testing with that. And so I think that's where we can definitely start to kind of shift into the big next steps of like, how do we actually evaluate what these are performing like? We got a question from Patrick Borkholder. I think we are coming close to time, but until they kick us off, we're going to keep going. He asked, Mike, what time frame do you give an A/B test before you can validate the data? 90 days, less or more?
So it's a great question. I think 90 days is probably close to the minimum amount to make sure that you can, get a handful of prospective residents through a leasing cycle. Have to take into account seasonality and the stage that a property's in. Leasing up, it's really hard to compare that to a conventional stabilized property, but 90 days has worked really well for a lot of our customers. And if you're going to do that, probably doing a couple so that you can kind of fact check, was that a abnormality, or is that what we're seeing across the board from a test? But I think 90 days is good. But if you were doing it right now during leasing season, good luck comparing that to, a normal time of the year. So I think that's where context is really important when you're doing any sort of A/B test.
Yeah, and I think, with COVID specifically, that's going to be, I've seen us having to like go further out than we normally would in like a normal day-to-day, so that we can get a broader range of data to really start to see those trends. And luckily, I think a lot of the stuff that we're seeing, there's a good uptick happening right now, and there's a lot more potential coming through and a lot more demand happening. But like for January of this year all the way back to even January of last year, we can see just this crazy dip, but you can start to see the trends and how that dip happened, and you can apply that to marketing efforts for the rest of this year too. So good call out. Thanks for the question, Patrick. One last thing I want to throw in there is, in terms of the tools that are out there today that could be leveraged for easy adoption, what is one thing that should also be considered when evaluating the tech stack? Paul, you mentioned integrations and being able to see if there's the pros and cons to that. But I'll throw this one to Hannah. Like, what do you see when you guys are evaluating tech stacks with your partners or your customers? What are some things that you evaluate when considering whether or not you'll work with those?
Well, I think integrations is absolutely important. So if you're talking about a partner like Betterbot partnering with G5, for sure.
I don't even have to plug. I love this.
I know, right in there. But we're able to share that information, and right now we're working on enhancing that. So we're digging into multi-touch attribution, but we want to be able to grow with Betterbot and the data that we're getting through those interactions with the bot and put that into the multi-touch. So really be able to answer some of those questions. And then when it comes to someone on the property management side, just evaluating all of these new options that are around them, I think integrations is so important. You've got to have a vendor that is working with your software, that it's going to integrate properly. And that's how we're going to get the data end to end. Is when we have a combination of both, because you've got to see, we've got first touch, we've got last touch, but what's going on in the middle, and how can we better spend our dollars to get there? So I think I know I repeated integrations, but that is a really important, just a company that's willing to be flexible and really willing to partner with you. I think that's so important, when you can learn from each other and enhance your product that way. 100%.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's one of the things that I was talking with Paul actually at the start of this whole thing, like when we started working together, integrations was like the biggest component of like being able to evaluate how certain vendors are actually working with other vendors, and if it has to go through a redirect or it has to be a manual process to get those pieces connected. That's all stuff that's really valuable information to kind of figure out if it's worth bringing into your system, because of the workload that it will add to your leasing teams or your operations teams.
And Trevor, I know we're at time, but just to add, because I feel like I didn't do a great service when I said integrations. I should have framed it a little bit better too, because one of the main reasons we're so picky about it is because the priority is to still retain like that fiercely human element of the prospect journey, which I think like when we're looking at competitors and we're talking, you know, about why Thrive should manage a property, like we always want to say, well, one of the reasons is the people, and we're going to have the best interaction. We're going to put people in front of humans and make sure they have a great experience. So I guess, you know, we're weighing the benefits of the automation side and like making it more efficient for the teams with the end goal of getting them in front of the right people that, like, as Stephanie said, have been like and express intent and been like vetted and like, you know, they're at a point where they're ready to have a great conversation. We don't want those people to be a subject of like an automation, like, you know, drip campaign. Like we want those people to be on the phone or in front of you. So I think that's one of the main reasons we want it to be clean. So what the teams are used to using, you know, can help them then start that like real conversation, because then you compare like the closing ratios of that versus like, you know, completely self-guided tour or something. And we've learned very, very intensely that they are nowhere comparable. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to like frame that at the end because I think it's a big thing. We don't want to like lose touch of that. You know?
Yeah. So you almost are looking for solutions that will solve menial tasks to allow the leasing team to do what they do best, which is being human.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't have wrote a better marketing tagline.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. You might be able to see that on Betterbot.com, but I'm just not plugging or anything.
No big deal. Yeah.
This has been really awesome. I really appreciate Mike, Paul, Stephanie, like the time that you guys put into this. I really appreciate that. It was awesome being able to talk with all of you. Hannah, thank you for also jumping in. Brent, Patrick, Stephanie, Risa, Lindsay, Nathaniel, like all of you guys, I really appreciate you guys jumping on. This was a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to the rest of these sessions and jumping in. As always, if you guys want this recording or if you guys want to talk more marketing automations, shoot me an email. We'll get you connected with everybody else on here, and find us on LinkedIn. Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trevor. Great work, Trevor.
Bye.